This story began in a small town nestled between a mixed forest and sprawling fields. It was a warm, almost summery May, when the trees were fully clothed in fresh leaves and the grass surged from the earth in such vibrant rows, as if eager to declare its presence to all passers-by. It was roughly 7 o'clock in the evening on May 15th when a flurry of activity swept through the local animal shelter. Dmitri, one of the staff members, returned from a brief foray into the hilly outskirts of the forest, not empty-handed, but carrying a bundle containing a thin and ruffled cat. However, he brought more than just the cat. Inside a small cardboard box, 2 tiny kittens were whimpering mere balls of fluff, appearing to be no more than a few days old. This cat was named Dimka. She was a common gray color, adorned with a pair of snow-white patches at the base of her ears and striking green eyes. Some time ago, volunteers had found her on the edge of town, freezing in the pouring rain. Dimka looked utterly miserable and starving. A veterinary checkup revealed she was pregnant and due to give birth very soon. At the shelter, she was given a warm and cozy corner in a special enclosure. They provided her with the best food, attention, and affection. Dimka soon regained her strength and, just as expected, delivered 2 adorable kittens, both alive and healthy. It would seem that this peaceful episode could end there, but fate had other plans. While Dimka and her kittens enjoyed the peaceful rhythm of life at the shelter, and the staff were already thinking about finding them loving homes in a few weeks, the town began its annual spring inspection of the park areas. Municipal workers and inspectors went out early in the morning, examining trees for any signs of trunk disease, and if a tree threatened to fall in a strong wind or was completely rotten, it would be cut down for the safety of visitors. Most often, the focus was on old and dried-out oaks, poplars, or birches. And on one such day, to be precise on May 19th, at the edge of the park, a huge ancient oak came crashing down under the powerful blows of axes. According to the old-timers, it could have been around 150 years old. The oak stood very close to a playground, and the inspectors ordered its removal to prevent any possible accident. When the trunk crashed to the ground with a loud crack, the workers suddenly heard a faint, barely audible squeak. At first, they thought that someone had set off an alarm nearby or maybe a bird was chirping close by. But upon closer inspection, it became clear. A squirrel family lived in the hollow of the oak tree. For tiny baby squirrels emerged from the ruined nest, broken along with the tree trunk. Their eyes were almost closed, and they clung awkwardly to the bark, seemingly helpless against the raging reality around them. The workers immediately stopped all handling of the fallen tree, carefully moved aside the broken branches, and retrieved the baby squirrels. The mother was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she had fled in panic when she sensed the danger. Or maybe she was not nearby at all at that moment and could not return to the little ones because of the loud noise and the crowd of people. In any case, the baby squirrels were left alone. One of the park workers called the animal shelter, and 2 staff members immediately arrived. The very same team that had rescued wild animals in distress many times before. The baby squirrels were quickly taken away to provide them with the necessary care. And it was from this day that a new chapter began in the amazing story of Dimka, which would soon reverberate throughout the town, and then far beyond. It wasn't that the shelter didn't know how to handle wild animals. The staff had seen injured hedgehogs, a crow with a broken wing, and even a lost moose that had miraculously wandered into the shelter's yard, attracted by the scent of apples. But they had never held such tiny baby squirrels, barely a week old, in their hands. These fluffy little ones looked completely helpless. Thin tails, half-closed eyes, cute pinkish ears that did not yet stand upright, but drooped sadly down the sides of their heads. It's no wonder the shelter staff were perplexed. Squirrel milk is quite different in composition from cat milk, and the baby squirrels had to be fed on a special schedule every 2 hours, including at night. In addition, they needed constant warmth, gentle handling, and above all, the maternal care that humans, alas, could only provide in part. Then someone suggested an idea. Let's try putting the baby squirrels with Dimka. We have this wonderful cat who recently gave birth. Maybe her maternal instincts will kick in, and she will take in the little ones. To say that the proposal was bold was an understatement. In nature, cats and squirrels are not friends at all. Yes, cats sometimes hunt squirrels, and squirrels, sensing a threat, try to escape at the very sight of felines. No one could guarantee that Dimka wouldn't see the baby squirrels as potential prey. However, the shelter had witnessed cases where a dog nursed kittens, a cat nursed ducklings, and a hen adopted abandoned kittens. So there was hope. Perhaps nature would work another miracle? They decided to try. The next morning, around 11 o'clock, they chose one of the baby squirrels, the quietest and calmest, warmed it slightly in their hands, and gently placed it on a blanket next to Dimka and her own kittens. A deathly silence fell in the room. For a moment, it seemed even the sounds outside the window had stopped. Everyone present, which included a staff member named Sergey, a volunteer named Lena, and Dmitri himself, anxiously watched what would happen. Dimka, sensing a foreign smell, first frowned. If a cat can be said to have anything like human facial expressions, got up and warily sniffed the baby squirrel. It, apparently exhausted from the stresses it had endured, lay perfectly still. The hearts of the people literally froze, and Sergey even involuntarily held his breath, expecting the cat might unsheath its claws. But after a few seconds that stretched like an eternity, Dimka suddenly began licking the tiny baby squirrel, carefully, as if it were one of her own kittens. Everyone sighed with relief, and tears welled up in Lena's eyes. A hope instantly surged within her. It looks like Dimka has accepted them. They tested several baby squirrels one after another. It was the same thing. No aggression, only maternal affection. An incredible feeling of joy washed over the shelter staff. But it was too early to relax. After all, Dimka couldn't produce enough milk to feed both her own kittens and for baby squirrels at once. This meant they would have to bottle feed the baby squirrels, while the cat provided them with comfort, warmth, and maternal care. And of course, she could not neglect her own kittens. However, the very fact that a cat had accepted baby squirrels was both shocking and amazing. Nobody expected such a turn of events. Soon the first curious visitors appeared at the shelter, friends of the staff members, who were interested in seeing this miracle. Whispers about the unusual maternal feat spread wider and wider. From that moment on, the staff began around-the-clock duty. The most difficult thing was to heat up a special formula that mimicked squirrel milk every 2 hours. The little ones were fed from tiny bottles or syringes without needles. Dimka helped as much as she could. She cared for them, warmed them, licked them, nudged them with her nose if one of the baby squirrels snored too long and didn't wake up for feeding. One of the baby squirrels, the smallest and weakest, constantly hid under Dimka's paw, as if it knew that warmth and care would bring it salvation. The people and the cat began to act as a well-coordinated team. Dimka nursed her 2 kittens and simultaneously accepted the baby squirrels. But when they started squeaking, the staff would manually feed them from a bottle. At times, comical scenes arose. A baby squirrel, having tasted cat milk, would start nudging Dimka's fur with its nose like a kitten and comically try to purr, although it didn't quite succeed. On the other hand, Dimka's kittens watched with curiosity as these strange, tailed siblings quickly settled into their blanket. No one complained, as if the concepts of my species and another species had been erased in their sweet, fluffy community. The rumor of the cat who had taken baby squirrels under her wing, or rather under her paw, spread quickly throughout the town. 2 days after the first photos appeared on social networks, a queue of people wishing to see this miracle in person literally formed at the shelter. Some brought gifts for the shelter, bags of food, toys, bowls, others donated money, and some brought their children to show how nature can surprise us and break stereotypes. Dmitri, despite his obvious pride in the shelter, was a calm and reasonable man. He tried to explain to visitors, "Guys, it's not all rosy here. Dimka won't be able to feed the baby squirrels completely with milk. We are actually fighting for their lives, and it's hard work every day." However, the excitement continued to grow. Dimka began to be called a heroine, and her offspring a remarkable family. Journalists from the local television station also interviewed the staff and shot a short report. Days passed, and the baby squirrels gradually grew stronger, gained weight, and Dimka's kittens also became more energetic. It seemed that nothing threatened this sweet story, but reality sometimes knows how to throw up the most unexpected challenges. And just at the end of the third week of May, poachers appeared in the forests surrounding the town, hunting for fur-bearing animals. They intended to catch baby squirrels, martens, and even foxes for their valuable fur. However, no one at the shelter suspected the arrival of these unwelcome guests for the time being. But they became the catalyst for new events. As the last week of May drew to a close, Dmitri, the person who had found Dimka, decided that it was time to start preparing the baby squirrels for their future life in the wild. It was no secret that squirrels are wild animals, and they could not stay at the shelter. At the same time, Dimka's grown kittens had already opened their eyes, began to waddle comically around the enclosure and explore the world. The baby squirrels, who had grown up with the kittens, accepted them as something self-evident. But a wild animal needs to know how to climb trees, find food, and be independent. First, the shelter organized special walks. Under the supervision of staff, the baby squirrels were released into the inner yard, where there were several large cages and training enclosures. Branches and snags were put there so that the baby squirrels could learn to jump, climb, strengthen their paws, and develop their reflexes. Dimka also came out into the yard at such moments, of course, on a safe leash and under supervision. She watched her adopted children with curiosity as they clung to the bark with amazing agility and already ran along the poles. But when one of them lost its balance and fell, Dimka began to meow anxiously, as if calling for people's help. The time was drawing near when a decision had to be made. When should the baby squirrels be released into the wild? On the one hand, the staff understood that keeping them with the cat for too long would increase the risk of them becoming too attached to people and not being able to adapt to the wild. On the other hand, it was emotionally very difficult to part with the little ones, whom everyone had already grown to love, and Dimka, it seemed, genuinely suffered at the thought of them being taken away. One morning, on May 30th to be exact, Dmitri and Lena decided to take the baby squirrels to the forest, where they first planned to release them into a spacious but sheltered enclosure so that they could get used to the natural conditions for a couple of days, and then finally release them into the wild. They loaded 6 small creatures, 2 kittens and 4 baby squirrels, into large carriers. The kittens were traveling with Dimka because they decided to take them along for company. They still needed constant maternal care and feeding. The journey took about half an hour. The forest was awash in greenery at this time of year. The morning sun barely pierced through the foliage, and the wind gently rocked the tops of the pines. The silence, broken only by the songs of birds, promised a peaceful day. But as soon as Dmitri and Lena delved into the thicket, leaving the car on the side of the road, their hearts suddenly sank with a bad feeling. Somewhere nearby, the echo of a shot rang out. They quickly exchanged glances. Hunting was officially banned in these places, and unfortunately, this could mean that poachers were operating here. The same kind of people for whom a furry animal is not a living creature, but a useful catch. Dmitri suggested that, without wasting time, they move away from the path to hide the animals in the car and go search for the source of the shot themselves and check if there was any danger nearby. Dimka began to hiss anxiously in the carrier, as if she sensed something was wrong. Lena supported the idea of returning, as risking the safety of the animals was unacceptable. But before they could reach the car, 2 men with rifles appeared from behind a bend in the dirt road. Their faces were unpleasant, coarse, with noticeable angry creases, and their pupils seemed to burn with the thrill of the hunt. "Well, little birds, lost your way?" one of them grumbled, casting a quick glance at the carriers. "And what do you have there, a cat, kittens, and some baby squirrels? Heh, what are you doing here?" Dmitri realized there was nowhere to retreat. Thank goodness his partner was nearby, and together they could at least resist in some way. Sergei, who was left at the shelter, had no idea what kind of predicament his colleagues had gotten into. The poachers blocked the road in such a way that it was difficult to get around them. Thick bushes on the right and fallen tree trunks on the left after sanitary felling. "Don't be afraid, we're just taking a walk here," Dmitri said as calmly as possible, trying to hide the worry in his voice. But his heart was already beating so loudly that it seemed to be heard throughout the area. Thoughts flashed through his head. What if these 2 decide that we are in their way? What if? Lena was pressing the carrier with Dimka to herself. She felt the cat twitching inside, frightened, and whispered softly to Dmitri, "We need to try to pass them without getting into a conflict." But the guests clearly did not intend to simply give way. The pause dragged on. The poacher on the left spat on the ground and asked mockingly, "Why are you silent? We're not here for no reason either. Are you nature protectors? Maybe you want to call the police?" He grinned, clearly enjoying the fear that emanated from Dmitri and Lena. The second carrier, where the baby squirrels were, was with Dmitri. One of the baby squirrels began to squeak anxiously, as if sensing the mood of its adopted father. A faint scratching sound was heard. The little creature was scratching against the plastic, trying to get out or at least understand what was happening. Lena felt a cold dread inside when she imagined what these two could do if they realized that there was a whole catch here. Baby squirrels. Kittens. Dmitri's hands were shaking, but he tried to compose himself. "We're not looking for a fight, guys," he said as peacefully as possible. "We just want to get to the car, then we'll drive to the shelter. We have animals that need care. I'm sure you don't want any trouble either." At the same time, he slowly began to move a couple of steps forward, trying to signal to Lena to follow him. But at that moment, another shot rang out somewhere deeper in the forest. A second later, a third person jumped out from the side opposite the road. He was holding a gun in his hand, and something was clearly moving in the bag on his back. One could guess. It was either an injured squirrel or another victim of illegal hunting. The newcomer shouted, "Guys, what are you stuck there for? We need to get out of here before we're spotted." And then he noticed Dmitri and Lena. And who are these people? Lena's heart sank. She saw that the newcomer's movements were sharp, like those of an enraged beast, and at the same time he was taking large steps, closing the distance. The situation could become explosive at any moment. Dimka in the carrier hissed louder. It seemed that in a moment she would start thrashing around, trying to protect the baby squirrels. "Okay, give me your carrier here," the most aggressive of the poachers unexpectedly demanded, the one who spat on the ground. He pointed the barrel of his rifle at Dmitri. "We'll take the baby squirrels, and the cat and kittens can also be sold. Who knows who might like them?" Lena, feeling a wave of horror, instinctively clutched the carrier with Dimka tighter. Dmitri raised his hand in a soothing gesture. "Wait, don't touch them." As in slow motion, Dmitri watched as the poacher raised his rifle. In one lightning-fast movement, Dmitri's hand darted into his own bag, where a small pepper spray was lying. Not the most serious weapon, but better than nothing. He was not an aggressive person, but he understood that every second counted. If he didn't protect himself now, it could all end terribly. While all this was happening, there was a loud crack of branches to the side, and a figure emerged from behind the dense spruce forest, a man in a hunting uniform, with official patches of the local forestry. It turned out to be a game warden named Oleg, who was just patrolling the forest when he heard strange shots and decided to investigate what was going on. "Stop!" he shouted loudly. "Drop your weapons. I have the right to detain you for poaching." The situation changed in an instant. The three poachers clearly did not expect such a decisive counteraction. One rushed to run away. Another, raising his gun, tried to shout something, but Oleg had already aimed his hunting weapon at him. His status as a game warden specially authorized to protect the forest gave him this right, and although it was only a pump-action double-barrel shotgun, it looked imposing. Oleg turned to Dmitri and Lena. "Get to the road quickly. I'll hold them." Lena, without waiting for a second order, grabbed the carrier with Dimka and pressed it to her chest, and Dmitri carefully hugged the second one, where the baby squirrels were squeaking. They carefully, trying not to touch the fallen trees, ran towards the car. Somewhere behind them, the shouts of the game warden and the poachers could be heard, but silence surrounded them, like an invisible protective veil. When they finally reached the car, they were both soaked with sweat and trembling from the adrenaline that was now coursing through their blood. Dimka, sensing that they had reached a safe place, pressed against the side of the carrier and only occasionally meowed softly, calling the kittens to her. The baby squirrels fell silent, burying their faces against each other. Dmitri and Lena nervously exchanged glances. "That was awful." Lena wiped the sweat from her forehead. Dmitri nodded. "At least we're safe, and the animals are safe. I hope the game warden managed to stop them." At that moment, they realized how precious this saved life was, that of the cat, the baby squirrels, and the kittens. It was terrifying to imagine what could have happened. Dmitri, without delay, opened the car door and carefully placed both carriers on the back seat. Then he started the engine. "We won't be going back to the forest today," he said quietly. "It's better to go back to the shelter." Lena just sighed with relief. Yes, they'll be safer here anyway than where such people walk. Returning to the shelter, the first thing they did was to tell Sergei and the other staff members about the incident. Everyone was horrified by what they had heard and immediately decided to contact Oleg, the game warden. Fortunately, it turned out that 2 of the poachers had indeed been detained, and the 3rd had managed to escape. But now game wardens and police were actively patrolling the forest. Such raids were unacceptable, which meant that serious measures would be taken to protect the local animals. During the following week, the shelter did not make any attempts to take the baby squirrels into the forest again. They decided to wait until this whole situation with the poachers calmed down and the forest became safer. At the same time, the baby squirrels had even more time to improve their health and develop their skills. They were already crawling all over a special squirrel tower inside a spacious enclosure, which the staff had converted right in the shelter building. Dimka continued to lovingly care for them, although her own kittens had already become quite energetic, and some of the visitors had even booked one of the kittens for adoption. The 1st of June arrived, and the weather outside was mild and summery warm. At the shelter, they decided that the time had come to hold a ceremonial farewell for the baby squirrels into the wild. Of course, it was impossible to do this right away by releasing them directly into the thicket, as there was too great a risk that they would get into trouble without preparation. However, a few kilometers from the town, closer to the mountainous part of the forest, there was a small area where the local forestry had organized a rehabilitation zone for wild animals. Large enclosures, as close as possible to their natural environment, had been built there with a mesh roof that protected them from predators but allowed the animals to get used to the weather conditions and movement at a height. It was there that they decided to take the baby squirrels. Dmitri called Oleg, the game warden, to coordinate all the details. He approved the plan. And so, in the morning of June 2nd, the shelter staff, along with Dimka and her family, set off for the rehabilitation zone. The cars arrived at the place at about 10 o'clock in the morning. The forest greeted them with the rustling of crowns, freshness, and soft sunlight that filtered through the foliage. The enclosures were located not far from a river cliff, which added even more romance to the place. The staff carefully moved the baby squirrels and placed them in a spacious forest house, where inside there were living trees, branches, snags, and cones, so that they could hone their skills in searching for food and climbing. Dimka was also allowed to enter and look around at everything that was going on. The kittens froze beside her, and the baby squirrels began to explore the new territory with curiosity. One of them, the most daring, jumped to a snag and instantly scrambled up, as if trying to show, "Look, I'm already big and independent." Everyone present felt mixed emotions, from a slight sadness before the parting to pride that they had brought the matter to a successful conclusion. Dimka, seeing that the baby squirrels were scattering among the trees, meowed softly, as if in a farewell gesture, as if saying, "Be careful, my fluffy children." And although many thought that a cat was not capable of experiencing human emotions, it seemed that understanding and a slight sadness sparkled in her eyes. According to the plan, the baby squirrels were to spend about 7 days here, get used to the semi-wild environment, and learn to find food, which the game warden specially left for them in different corners of the enclosure. Then the doors would open before them, and they would be able to go into the real forest, living a normal life for squirrels. Dimka returned with the people to the shelter, where her kittens continued to grow under the care of the staff. And Lena and Dmitri had a special warmth in their hearts. After all, they had overcome so many difficulties to save this unusual family. From the first anxious days, when they did not understand whether the cat would accept the baby squirrels, to the dangerous encounter with the poachers, and the happy visit to Oleg, the game warden. 3 days later, the shelter received a call from Oleg, who was on duty at the rehabilitation center. There was excitement in his voice. "There is a small problem. One of the baby squirrels is behaving strangely. He is not eating at all and is hardly moving. It seems he misses Dimka." Dmitri and Lena immediately became alert. They didn't want the little squirrel to get sick. 3 days ago, everything had looked good. The little ones were happily frolicking and exercising their climbing. But sometimes in animals, especially such young ones, stress and sadness can appear unexpectedly. And indeed, a nearly maternal bond had formed between the baby squirrels and Dimka. Without wasting time, Dmitri got into the car and half an hour later was already at the enclosure where the stubborn one lived. He was sitting on one of the highest branches and looking into the distance, as if looking for someone. He didn't even stir at the sight of a human, although he had previously shown interest. It seems he really lacks companionship, Dmitri thought. In the end, they decided to bring Dimka for a couple of days. Maybe her presence would help the little squirrel calm down and finally settle into the new place? And indeed, when Lena brought Dimka the next day, something touching happened. The baby squirrel, seeing her through the mesh, literally fell off the branch and began to squeak, running up to the entrance of the enclosure. Dimka immediately responded. Although animals do not have a clear language, there was no doubt that care could be read in her eyes. When they were let into the common yard, the baby squirrel ran up to the cat and buried its face in her side, as if looking for that very same maternal warmth. Dimka immediately began to lick its face. Tears of joy came to the staff's eyes. The reunion looked so touching, Dmitri thought. Maybe the little squirrel was not ready for a sudden separation from Dimka. Well, let them stay together for a couple of days, after all. Nature will sort everything out, and the squirrel will understand where its home is. And indeed, over the next 48 hours, the little squirrel cheered up, began to actively run around the trees, playing with its fellows. Dimka quietly watched this with maternal pride. She didn't have to chase after it on the branches because the baby squirrels were already quite grown up, and if they got tired or frightened, they would go down, pressing against the cat, exactly as Dimka's kittens did at home. And then came that long-awaited day, June 9th, when the game wardens considered the baby squirrel strong enough and adapted to an independent life. Oleg called the shelter. "Today we will open the enclosure, and they will be able to leave when they want." Usually in such cases, baby squirrels do not leave the familiar place immediately. Some may stay in the enclosure for another day or two. Some go to explore the surrounding area and then return. The main thing is to give them the freedom of choice. Dmitri, Lena, and several other shelter staff agreed to arrive early to witness the ceremonial release. In the morning at about 8 o'clock, when the sun was just rising above the tops of the pines, they were already standing at the enclosure. Oleg removed the lock, opened the door, and now the entrance was free. Inside the enclosure, for baby squirrels were sleeping, who had managed to grow into quite strong, fluffy creatures. Hearing that the people had opened the door, they pricked up their ears and began to look. What is happening? Dimka was also there. She lay down near one of the walls, warming herself in the morning rays of the sun. She hesitated for a few moments, waiting to see what her adopted offspring would do. The first baby squirrel, the same daring one, curiously ran to the exit, poked its face out and sniffed. Then it cautiously climbed out, looking around at the surrounding trees. Then the second one jumped out, also deciding to check what those boundless expanses were. The third and fourth still hesitated a little, but seeing that nothing terrible was happening, slowly moved towards the exit. Lena's heart sank with emotion. "They're leaving?" Dmitri put his arm around her shoulders. "Yes, but that's the goal, to give them freedom. They are not domestic cats, and they need the forest." Feeling the beckoning call of nature, the baby squirrels ran to the nearest tree, deftly climbed it and disappeared into the dense foliage, flying from branch to branch. Some of them were scurrying along the trunk just a couple of minutes ago, as if saying, "Goodbye, people. Thank you for everything." And at this time, Dimka sat on her hind legs and watched them attentively. It seemed that she understood that her mission was complete. Some may say that a cat is not capable of thinking about this, but it was impossible not to notice how calmly she watched the baby squirrels go. Only one of them, the same, particularly attached one before disappearing between the branches, flew down and ran up to Dimka, nuzzling her soft fur with its nose. It was a kind of farewell gesture. The shelter staff felt a pang of emotion in their chests. "Good luck, little one," whispered Lena. After this exciting moment, the people stood by the enclosure for a long time, hoping to catch a glimpse of how the baby squirrels frolicked in the branches. But the fluffy little ones had already dissolved into the green canopy of the forest, as if they were born there and had never left the place. One of the game wardens quietly turned to Dmitri. "Congratulations. I think they'll have every chance to survive and live happily here. Well, we'll try to keep a safe environment for them." Everyone felt light and joyful. The poachers had not been seen in the area for the past few days. Perhaps they were frightened by the arrest. Oleg promised that the forest area would now be patrolled even more thoroughly, especially in the run-up to the summer, when there would be many tourists and vacationers. Everything was returning to normal. Dimka and the kittens returned to the shelter, where their familiar routine awaited them. A soft bed, a bowl of food, the gentle hands of volunteers, and most importantly, peace and confidence in the future. But something had clearly changed in her. Now the cat Dimka was perceived not just as another cat who ended up at the shelter, but as a true symbol of kindness, which reminded every visitor that maternal love knows no boundaries between species. About 2 weeks had passed since the baby squirrels were released into the forest. The shelter had returned to its usual life. Dimka's kittens were already about 3 weeks old and were getting bolder and stronger. Visitors continued to come, as the story of the cat who raised baby squirrels had spread across the internet and local newspapers. However, no one expected that one evening, on June 25th to be exact, closer to sunset, a reddish-gray shadow would appear on the shelter fence. Lena, having finished her round of the enclosures, accidentally noticed a quick movement in the twilight. Could that be a squirrel? She walked closer to the gate and saw a fluffy creature that jumped over the fence and scurried up the nearest tree. Her heart froze with memories. Could it be one of our baby squirrels? The creature already looked grown, its tail fluffy and its coat glistening. The squirrel paused for a moment on the branch, looking straight at Lena, as if recognizing her. Then it made a guttural squeak, something between an inviting and joyful sound, and quickly disappeared behind the trunk. Lena, stunned, walked around the tree, but the squirrel was nowhere to be seen. "Maybe I just imagined it," she thought, but her heart told her it was definitely one of those four. Maybe it wanted to visit us or Dimka. Overwhelmed with these thoughts, Lena rushed to the enclosure where Dimka and the kittens usually strolled during the day, but at that moment they were already resting inside the building. She took out her phone, turned on the camera, hoping to capture the fleeting guest. But she was too late. The squirrel had disappeared into the night. Nevertheless, Lena was left with a deep feeling of gratitude to nature. Even for just a few seconds, one of Dimka's children had returned to take a fleeting look at the place that had once become its home. The next morning, she told Dmitri and the others about it. Sergei joked, "Yes, apparently it came to say, 'Thank you, people, I'm doing great.'" Everyone laughed, and you couldn't ask Dimka what she thought about it all. But I wanted to believe that, having seen her adopted mother, the squirrel would visit again. This is how the story of the cat Dimka, who completely against expectations took 4 orphaned baby squirrels under her protection and raised them side by side with her own kittens, ended. This story had everything: the anxiety and dangers caused by poachers, unexpected rescues and the help of the game warden, the emotional experiences of people who were ready to do anything to save little lives, and, of course, the culminating moment when the little ones returned to their native element, the wild. Dimka remained in the shelter, enjoying great honor and love. Her kittens, having grown stronger, found good homes and moved to different places, but always remained the children of the heroine Dimka. That is how they were respectfully called by those who remembered the story. The baby squirrels adapted to life in the forest, and it is quite possible that they themselves soon had offspring, passing on new genes, enriched with a touch of feline tenderness. Now that everything had settled down and life had returned to a peaceful pace, The shelter staff often recalled the events of the past weeks. Some shuddered, remembering that dangerous encounter with the poachers, because it was terrifying to think that tragedy had been so close. Others laughed, remembering how they had fed the baby squirrels at night and lost sleep, running from one bottle to another. And on the whole, everyone understood. This story was not only about animals, but also about ourselves, about how sometimes we need to step over stereotypes. A cat can raise baby squirrels, people can stand up for the weak, and nature can respond to kindness, albeit in a symbolic way, with some short visit as a guest. After all, if you think about it, Dimka could have behaved completely differently and rejected the baby squirrels, and no one would have blamed her. But she, driven by a maternal instinct or something greater, going beyond our ordinary ideas, accepted these orphans and gave them a chance to survive. And today we can say with joy, love knows no boundaries, even between species. I hope you enjoyed this long, emotional story about Dimka and her amazing foster children. If it touched something in your soul, please share your thoughts. Write what you think about this wonderful cat and her kind heart. Like it if you want, or tell your friends about the miracles that happen in ordinary shelters. Believe me, stories like these inspire people to protect nature and treat our lesser brothers with warmth and compassion. After all, who knows, maybe right now somewhere in the thick branches there is another young baby squirrel, looking at the world with curious eyes and waiting for us to make our small feet help it survive and preserve this fragile harmony of life. Take care of animals and remember that even one cat can change the fate of many creatures if it shows a drop of compassion. And perhaps in gratitude, nature will one day smile at you in the same way as it smiled at Dimka, allowing her to become a mother to those who needed it so much. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We would be happy to hear your opinion, your stories, and your support in the comments. May the good that we do today return as good from the most unexpected corners of the wild. All the best to you.